So let's get kicked off. Terry McVinnis is from Boeing, and he's Director of System Safety and Regulatory Affairs. And Yannick Melange is from Airbus, and he is Senior Vice President and Chief Product Safety Officer. Oh yeah, Tony. Oh yeah, Tony Cramp. We all know Tony, Vice President of Shell Aircraft. David Solar, EASA, Acting Head of Rotorcraft Department, and Nolan Crawford with the FAA Aviation Safety Inspector, and Chris Hawks, Health, Safety, and Security Director with the IOGP. So let's begin with Terry. You ready?
I'll try.
Okay. Terry, you've been a part of the collaborative effort on the fixed-wing side for over 30 years, beginning as an airline pilot and then a senior executive with ALPA, and then on to Boeing. So he's had a multifaceted career. Terry, what can you share about the lessons on the fixed-wing journey, recognizing that we would really like to short-circuit that and not spend 30 years getting to where the fixed-wing side is today?
Well, in terms of lessons learned, I mean, I think, first of all, what I've heard this morning, you're all on the right track, because to get where we've gotten to today in the fixed-wing arena has really taken that collaboration and that communication and that working together spirit that in the beginning was not really easy. I know Steve Predmore is here, yep. And he can share also some of the stories that as we were kind of putting some of this stuff together back in the mid-2000s, it was difficult at times. We had different perspectives that we brought to the table. And we had different constituents that we were trying to please. And so some of those early discussions were sometimes heated, but we all had a single goal in mind, and that was to improve the aviation system from a safety perspective. And through that common value that was so important, we were able to make some great progress and work through some of the issues that we had to work through. And in terms of the issues, I think probably the biggest issue that we ended up having to work through was that issue of trust. I know Fuzzy mentioned it in his talk earlier. And trust is a very difficult thing to work through. It's such a precious and critical element of any sort of collaboration that you have. Because when you get to the point where you're going to say, we're not going to compete on safety anymore, you are putting yourself and your companies and your constituents on the line in terms of what that really means. And it's easy to say, but it's more important in how you implement that going forward. So that trust piece is very important. It's very difficult to get. It starts with trust between some individuals, which is what we did back in the early years. And then it goes to some trust between departments within organizations. I mean, one of the things I noticed at my airline is the safety department and the flight ops department, for example, didn't trust each other. And so we had to, even inside of my airline, had to build that sort of trust. And then eventually it led to trust between different institutions, such as the airline, the regulator, the pilot unions, to the point that we really got a whole change in the national safety structure because of that trust. But because it's so critical, it's also the thing that can destroy the whole thing. Because if anybody misuses the information or the data that is so much a part of this collaboration, if it gets misused, it sets you back years. So maintaining that level of, or building that level of trust and honoring that as sacred is I think, something that can help keeping things moving forward.
So Terry, when we've talked before about this, we've talked about trust, we've talked about, and where I think a lot of us are at is the protection of data and the proper use of data, and then also the non-punitive nature of voluntary disclosures. Could you talk just a minute about a couple of those?
This is one of my favorite topics. You know, creating a strong culture and a strong safety culture is again one of the foundations of making this work. Again, both at a organizational level and as an industry level. And when I talk the industry, I mean the regulator too, because the regulator is a very important part of the whole thing. And so you have to have that culture where it's okay to say what you did wrong or what's wrong out there in the system. Because if you're ever at a point where you don't have that comfort level and that ability to share that information in that non-punitive environment, then you're losing. You're not getting where you need to go. Now, I think it was also Fuzzy said, 90% of things are just acts or errors that take place. They're not intentional acts. And that's an important tenet to this whole thing from a culture standpoint, realizing that people do make mistakes. Nobody gets up in the morning to go to work and intentionally wants to make a mistake. And if they do, then you deal with that accordingly. But the 90% or more of those unintentional errors in a good, strong safety culture can lead to a confidence in understanding, if you're a manager, understanding what's going on out there in the system, and it leads to that confidence in the workforce in believing that they're part of a team that's making things safer, not only for them but for the traveling public.
Okay, good. Thank you, Terry. Yannick, would you care to continue that? You come at it from the European side, having spent all of your career for working in heavy aircraft and for Airbus. And one of the questions that I did want to ask you also is, where does innovation and competition come into play with OEMs? Because we have a lot of OEMs here, and I think that we're curious about that as well.
Well, just before replying that, I could have done cut and paste of what Terry said, 100%. What Terry said, really, this is not only blah, blah, blah. Some could consider it's blah, blah, blah. Actually, it is not. And we work together on a regular basis. Actually, yesterday we were together the day before yesterday in Brussels with EASA for the Data for Safety project, working on these issues, So it's something we do on a regular basis. Now back to your question about innovation and how does it work in terms of safety and competition. I think it's very, very healthy. Very healthy. Because it's a very positive element of stimulations to further improve safety and the product, which at the end of the day, it's an absolutely obvious that safety for us is, and for you as well, is a very strong prerequisite to a sustainable business for the air transport system. I think we need to think about the today environment. We are in a buzz society, we all know that. We have, at the air transport system level, achieved a very remarkable and touchwood accident rate. The today public expectation is 0 accidents. 0 accidents. And I am convinced that when you consider the traffic going to double in the next 10, 15 years, I'm convinced that we have, in bracket, almost fixed the easiest part of it, which is reliability, which is a machine, which is improving interfaces. And the biggest challenge ahead of us is certainly the human factor aspect. Understanding why everything being normal, being manageable, suddenly it comes to a bad conclusion. And I think with this significant traffic increase, the one element which is probably the most powerful in terms of continuing improving the safety record is really the sharing of information independently of any competitive aspect. This is something we can't measure in terms of demonstrate on a day-to-day basis on the added value. It's obvious because it helps avoiding events. Events being avoided, you are not aware of them necessarily, but it's extremely powerful. If I may, I just want to give you an example for the ones who are looking for examples for your people. You might remember that in 2003, if my memory is correct, we had an F-100 before, which was shut down by a man-pad during the Iraqi war after taking off from Baghdad. The three hydraulic systems were simply lost. There was a major fire. And when you read the DFDR, the flight data recorder, and the voice recorders, it's absolutely obvious that the captain, who was quite young, he had only 3,000 flight hours in total, you could realize that it did not take him more than a few seconds to understand that the only way to bring back the plane safely to the ground was to control the plane only with the engine thrust, to control the pitch, the roll, and the energy. You can see he's learning very quickly, and he made it. When we invited the crew to come to Toulouse, we had long discussions together, and he made the following statement. Well, you know, guys, few months ago, before this event, I read the book of Al Wayne, who was the captain of the DC-10 Sioux City event, which got similar conditions of losing all flight controls. They made it in a difficult manner, but they made it, and this captain wrote a book. And the captain of the Baghdad event told us, you know, I don't know, but this is maybe what saves the day. Think about that, the power of information sharing in a non-competitive environment. And we do that with all our operators. We meet on a regular basis at safety level amongst OEMs, engine supplier, aircraft suppliers. Flight test community of all OEMs meet on a regular basis as well. And we put aside the colorful competition battlefield. Mm-hmm. It's all about trust.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you, Yannick. Yeah. Tony? Before I ask you your comments on collaboration, I wanted to ask you about safety as an investment. And there's an 800-pound gorilla sitting over in the corner, and its name is procurement. And we've talked about, last year we talked a little bit about procurement and the divide between the role of the aviation advisors and procurement. And I've talked to our antitrust people, and I'm not going anywhere near that other side, believe me. But a question for you is, do you think we'll ever get to the point where the procurement decision incorporates the aviation safety elements from a quality standpoint that we're trying to foster with this group today?
In short, yes, because we already do it on occasion. We just don't do it enough. I think the responsibility does sit with us as the aviation advisors, and that's why it's fantastic to see more of the oil and gas companies here today, because our responsibility is effectively to interpret and educate those contracting and procurement teams. They've got a very tight job. You heard the sort of figures. They're the guys who are managing the costs across the business. They've got very strong targets they've got to meet. The logistics contracting is just one part of that, and they have cost savings in there. The difference is that a lot of us, those of us that are lucky enough to work for the companies that will invest in an aviation team, have got the ability to educate them on each occasion. You saw the list of companies or the accident rates between those that are in the ASC and those that are not. Right. A lot of those companies that are contracting for those services perhaps haven't got an aviation team, don't have anybody within the organization that can interpret what is the value on safety. We're lucky we do. It's one of the most important priorities for me to know that I've got aviation guys in each one of the businesses who can get involved in that contracting process. But they need to be able to differentiate within that. And so we need to have requirements, standards, call them what you will, so that we can go to those contracting and procurement guys and actually illustrate what it means. Why are you paying for this difference? So from what we need from HeliOffshore, as Fuzzy said, we need the clarity on the requirements, the new ones that we're going to pay for, but we also need clarity about what we're asking for in the day-to-day contracts. We've had some bad experiences within Shell where business units have not, they've just asked for a baseline, tell us who meets the minimum standards, and then we'll go into a contracting round and we'll try and beat the crap out of them and get as much money out of that contract as we can. That was a bad example, and we used that one when we have the further discussions. But we need to be in that discussion to be able to influence them. And we therefore need to be using the sort of work that's done, whether it's lessons learned from fixed wing, and we brought out our 771 about 14 years ago, looking at some of the initiatives that we got from fixed wing, greater design, wider use of simulation, HUMS, TCAS, etc. That was lessons learned there. And it became a very powerful argument that was very easy to go and put before the guys with the money to get them to invest. So, yeah, talk about what we want to do in this group, but then make sure we've got the arguments that we can go and present, and we've got the people there. But we need to get more people involved, both in here, but also the IOGP. And great to see that Fuzzy's up there and has got this focus, because he's in a position where we can pull more of the oil and gas companies, more of your customers into that organization, educate them, share materials, and enable them to make the same discussions, so we can get rid of the aircraft types we don't want to be flying anymore. We can start raising the bar on some of the practices.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I first met Tony in the aftermath of an accident, and I know that collaboration could have been important in the prevention of that. So could you talk a little bit about collaboration?
Yeah, I think the collaboration is trust. We had that meeting way back in 2009, and I think when we're talking about collaboration, it's the ability to use the collective mind, to not be put off your stride because you're upset over something, and you therefore want to take it out on someone. Yeah, one of the great strengths for me for HeliOffshore and EHOC before it is the fact that we do all get together as senior leaders in our organizations. We spend time drinking, getting to know each other socially, and that makes our work relationship that much more robust and more effective going forward. And I think that's a huge basis for what we do and what we take forward.
Okay, thank you, Tony. Nolan, the FAA has obviously been a major partner in the collaborative efforts in fixed wing for years, and I know you sit astride both the fixed wing and the rotor wing side. So could you talk to us a little bit about that journey and about some of the things you see for the rotorcraft side? And Nolan's also involved with the U.S. helicopter safety team as well.
I think that we can learn a lot from the fixed wing world, where they were, where they are today. For example, CAS was put in effect many years ago as a team effort, as a collaborative effort between industry and government. And from 1998 to approximately 2008, they actually reduced the fatal accident rate by approximately 83%, I believe, is the number that's out there. That's a team collaborative effort, sharing resources, sharing information, open exchange of information, something that we really haven't seen in the helicopter world until the last couple of years. It's starting to develop a little more. About 3 years ago, we in the FAA, the United States Helicopter Safety Team, and working with the International Helicopter Safety Team, started looking at 109 accidents. We broke it down to 54 of those accidents dealing with loss of control, dealing with unattended IMC, and low altitude accidents. We have since been able to come up with 22 safety enhancements. 16 of those are operational today. 5 will go into effect in July, and one of them has actually been deferred until we get a little more data on it. And saying that, though, most of those, just like when CAS started, is a look-back type operation. CAS has kind of progressed or evolved, if you will, beyond that, looking into the future, using data to make decisions, to put stuff into effect, to stop accidents based on data and new technologies and things of that nature. That's the same thing that we're trying to do now with the USHST through those safety enhancements. Some of the things that we're working within the FAA right now, and we've been talking to several of our counterparts around the world, is we're working some new technology stuff. For example, for the helicopter world, we are now working on a head-worn display. We're working on enhanced vision, combined vision, synthetic vision, stuff that's new technologies that's going to keep the guys and ladies' heads up versus inside. We are working with a lot of the operators that are already working stuff that HeliOffshore has already been working on with hums and stuff like that. Great devices to predict something versus being, you know, reactive to something that just happened.
Great, thanks, Nolan. And we were talking earlier, when you look at where the rotorcraft industry is today, we're looking backwards at accidents. Where you look at where CAST is today with the SIAS and with InfoShare, the last 22 safety recommendations coming out of CAST were based on data collected looking forward. That's where we would like to be as well. Thanks, Nolan. David, also spent most of your life in the fixed wing world with the EASA. And you made some comments to me earlier about some of the challenges that you thought we faced on the rotorcraft side. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm coming from also the fixed wing, working with Airbus and Boeing since years, and before coming from industry fixed wing. And so I'm fairly new in this rotorcraft environment since September, and having a fresh pair of eyes looking at it. Sometimes a bit scary at what I'm of what I'm seeing. But at the end of the day, I think there is a huge opportunity to have the step that everybody needs to be. First, I would say what the future would look like, and it's not for the people here, but it's for the people going on board of these helicopters, doing offshore operations. And I had the chance to see a boarding environment in Aberdeen recently, and I was really amazed by the tension within this. You have people sitting, but then you have this boarding process where you have this safety briefing, 30 minutes long, with huge equipment, massive equipment that you have to wear. And the dream is to get rid of them. Get rid of this equipment and be exactly like, when we are all taking an airplane, it's a relaxing time now, compared to a threatening one. That's what we would like to see really at the end of the day, things changing for the people getting on board. For that, we have to do all together a huge effort and do kind of a revolution in terms of way of thinking. Not being reactive, as you mentioned, but much more predictive. And also, when we are predictive, to take the actions on a voluntary basis. Today, industry as a whole, what I see is that we are targeting the bare minimum. Certification standard, we do the bare minimum. We don't go beyond. In fixed wing, it's different. Certification is the really bare minimum, everybody knows about it. Each company has developed its own standards, going beyond to make sure they are reaching the target that they want to achieve. And sometimes it's a consensus among industry, sometimes it's self-initiatives, but at the end of the day, it's where we are heading towards. Technology is part of it, but not all of them. Most of it is human, and in the human aspects, I think we have to learn a lot from fixed wing. Proficiency, first, the criteria also, when I ask people, okay, what are the criteria to become a rotary pilot? It's changing from company to company. But when you look at what's done in fixed wing, you have a minimum criteria all among the industry. And I don't see that in the rotorcraft, for instance. Mm-hmm. Then the way we're doing training is different. Extensive use of simulator, I know offshore is a bit closer than fixed wing, but some other area it's completely not used. And it's really working together on that. What I would see is that we define all together here, you've got the ability, and when I'm hearing IOGP, we are ready to discuss about real projects to fund them all together. Just select the 5 we really want to push industry-wide and get them through the system. Mm-hmm. Not in 10 years, because that's also what is striking when I look at the industry. The decision-making process is so long to get something at the end of the day on the machine itself or in the field that we are not building confidence and trust in the front line. That's what we need today. And that's really what we would strive to do. In EASA, we have started to work on a rotorcraft safety roadmap. So we've been cleared. We have started a task force to really come up with concrete proposal that will not take 10 years to implement, but where we can have step approach with short-term also win-win.
So priority and execution.
Correct. It's nice to talk, nice to define the plan, nice to identify the risks. Now the next step really is what are we doing to tackle them efficiently? And not in 10 years, but tomorrow.
Okay, good. Thank you, David. Chris, Fuzzy talked a little bit about Project Saphira earlier, and I was curious, are you facing in Project Saphira the same issues that the fixed wing guys saw a couple decades ago and we're looking at today, that trust, that data security, and the non-punitive nature of things coming into the system?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Fuzzy did a great job this morning of explaining what Project Saphira was all about. It's all about eliminating fatalities in our industry and having 0 fatalities as an expectation. When we look at the data, so the way we came up with Project Saphira was to look at our fatality data. The catalyst was an increase in fatalities year on year, which is completely unacceptable to us in IRGP and everybody in this room. We looked at the data, and I'm not sure it was too much of a surprise, but when we looked at the data, we found that there were no new accidents. The fatalities that we had that year, we'd had at some stage in a previous year. The exact same circumstances, the exact same issues, the exact same underlying causes, and certainly when we started Saphira and creating the staircase and trying to look at that, we tried to work out what the barriers were, and it's exactly as Terry described earlier. It was a lack of trust, a lack of sharing, a lack of collaboration, and to a certain extent, we're still facing a lot of these issues today. We've got a lack of trust that we cannot share the details of our accidents. We won't share the details of our accidents for fear of prosecution, for fear of vilification in the public's eyes, for fear of reputational damage, for fear of not knowing if you've got the authority to share that sort of stuff. Talking about pushing decision making down to the lowest point. So, where we can really work together as an industry through collaboration with regulators, with our suppliers, and with each other and our companies, is to build that trust, to build that openness that I think the fixed wing have done a much better job. There's the ASAP program in the US, which I think is an excellent program, where people report their mistakes. They share, and in the room there's the regulators, the unions, the companies, and they openly discuss the mistakes that they've made and try and eliminate the causes of those mistakes. And that's the stage that we need to get to as an industry in the oil and gas sector, and specifically around rotorcraft. That we looked at the data for our aviation crashes. And it was the same picture. The crashes had happened before. The exact same circumstances had happened before. And it's just symptomatic of us as an industry, as people not learning. And I think it's unacceptable that somebody should die because somebody else didn't share their experience.